You know, and I'm not here to tell you there's no silver bullet to fescue. There's not. Anybody that's got it knows that. I've been working on things for 15 years, really hard for 10 years trying to figure out ways to make the fescue work. I desperately wanted to be able to finish animals on fescue, and boy, that's a tough row. There's some things we can do to change that a little bit, and we're going to go through those with kind of a list of what I termed grazing tools to manage or to manipulate fescue a little bit. So we're just going to go through them, and this is not and I know I got my title down there. Just forget that. This is not going to be a scientific presentation. This is going to be my experiences as a producer. Okay, and so we're not going to get too scientific. We will a little, but because I think that's a big part of it. So we've just got a place in North Missouri, as Todd said. We run about 350 mama cows and do a little contract grazing with some more cows for another producer and raise some yearlings, raise our own females. And as I'm sure you guys are aware, the cow-calf thing, a mature cow can deal with the fescue issue pretty. I mean, there's still some issues, but it's not a big issue. Those growing animals, those finishing animals, that's a whole nother story. And so we're going to go through that a little bit as we go through these different tools. And I'm going to break it down into basically 4 tools, just stock density, annuals, fertility, and then total renovation. Okay, and that's kind of what we're going to go through 4 of those. Anytime anybody understands, you got a question, jump up. This is not a presentation. This is a discussion. Okay, so I want you to jump right in. And anybody that's heard me talk again understands, that I'm a huge believer in using stock density. Todd talked about that, using the animals as a tool, as a way to manipulate our forages. And I'd kind of been headed down that road a long time ago. And as I mentioned yesterday, I had the chance to spend a couple weeks with Dr. Provenza out at Utah. And up to that point, I knew what I could do with stock density, but he made me a lot more aware of the interactions between the animals and the plants, and that just blatantly making the animals eat everything wasn't necessarily good for them and necessarily good for the land. There's a time to do that sometimes, and we're going to talk about that. So, stock density was something that nature did. We try to emulate that a little bit. We understand that animals have the ability to be very, very, very selective. They can pick, and if you ever go out and spend some time, sit and watch them, they can pick individual plants, they can pick individual leaves if they want to. They don't always necessarily do that, but if they want to, they can do that. And so animal selection ability is incredible. And from an animal performance standpoint, that's awesome, because the animals can pick and choose what they want to achieve their highest level of performance. However, in a fescue-based system, where you're trying to make sure that all these other plants, clovers and orchard grass and bluegrass and brome and all these other plants have an equal level of competition to fescue, allowing a lot of animal selectivity is not necessarily the best thing from a plant standpoint. Because if you got a mixture of plants out there, and cows have been raised on fescue, what's going to be the last plant that they're going to eat? The fescue, okay? And so if you don't have your stock density at a high enough level to manage that animal selection, and you move them on before the fescue plants have been grazed, all the clover plants have been grazed, all the orchard grass has been grazed, all the brome has been grazed, weakened and stunted a little bit, appropriately. But the fescue has not been grazed at all, and you move them on, what's going to be the strongest plant in that the fescue, no doubt, okay? So animal selection and stock density is, I believe, it's the biggest tool we have to do just about anything, but it has to be in balance between animal performance and that plant management, okay? And so for us, most of the time, we're on about at least a move every day. This is about 140,000 stock density, and you can get that uniform selection so that all the fescue plants are grazed at a little less than that. You know, it kind of depends on how much forage you have out there, what you're trying to do. This next couple of pictures, this is a mature set of cows. This is actually several years ago a set of contract cows out of Iowa. It was late in the year, so we had pretty good quality forage, and so you can see that, and that's what it looked like later. Now, this is not probably typical of how short I want it to look like, but this was mid-September. There was not going to be anything coming back to it, but there's no species favoritism, is there? Did they graze the clover? Did they graze the brome and not graze the fescue? Everything is going to come back in this field at a uniform level, right? Fescue is set back the same as the brome, as the clover, as everything else. And so that's the balancing point that we're trying to get to. We're trying to get enough stock density, again, that everything is grazed uniformly, not necessarily this short, but we'll get to that. But again, no species favoritism here. That's what we're looking for. And this was another field, a fescue and trefoil field that actually I took over probably 20 years ago now. And I was always curious about why they tended to graze this field a little stronger, even though at the time it was primarily fescue. And it was some work that Fred did with fescue and trefoil that led me to understand that. Because it had this trefoil in it, they would graze this fescue a lot more. So that's one trick. And I know farther south, trefoil is not as big of a legume, but from kind of central Missouri north, it's a fairly big, particularly toward the western half of the state. It's a pretty big legume for a lot of people. So that's something that we have focused on is trying to add that trefoil in, and if that all goes back to what Fred had. So again, just a couple of pictures to show you. These were cows that were on a daily strip. These were fall cows, dry cows. This is probably July, and these cows are going to start calving in September. And so that was about 120,000 stock density. Again, what we're looking for is we're not looking for bare dirt, but we're looking for everything to be grazed fairly uniformly. In this case, even the broadleafs was being impacted. But the primary thing, our indicator plant that I look at is the fescue. Do we have all the fescue plants grazed? That's the thing I'm looking for. I'm trying to also make sure I don't have bare ground, but I'm trying to make sure that every fescue plant is impacted for the most part.
I would like to ask you one question. Before which is the proportion? Do you remember the proportion that you have between fescue and trefoil in your farm?
Oh, I don't. We didn't measure it, but I'm guessing. And it varies seasonally from year to year, depending on the year. It also depends on how we grazed it the fall before. But this one probably had, some years it might have as much as, 30%. Some years maybe not, of trefoil. This field, when I first took it over, it was probably, of the grass species, it was probably 90% fescue, a little bit of Reed's canary grass. and I'll show you. So you can see how much of it looks like fescue now. And I'm going to show you a picture of this field now. This picture was probably, gosh, that was probably, what's that cow, 8? That was probably 2002 or probably 3 or 4. 2003 or 4. That would have been one of the first years we really started into density. John?
Were they eating the ironweeds or are they just dropping them out?
No, they're eating. This was the ironweeds, and that's a whole nother talk that I talk about the ironweeds. This was the middle of the summer. They were just at flower, just prior to flower. They were just stripping them. I mean, some of them they're knocking down, but that was something that they were really going after. As a result, we took out. You can see how much was in that field. That was one of the reasons I was focusing on hitting it quite this hard at this time of year. I thought I had too much ironweed, but after a while, I realized that that ironweed was probably my deepest taprooted plant in that field. That's what they were going for. So.
What were the bricks on the ironweed?
I didn't test them here. We have tested bricks on ironweed later. I mean, in years after that, and surprisingly, they're not bad. I mean, it's 2 weeks later than this, and they're crappy. But earlier than this, they're better. So again, that's what we're trying to do. Is we're trying to ensure that we have a stock density that's high enough to get every fescue plant grazed, and that's the indicator that I'm looking at. So here's another picture, and you can see we've got a. Oop, that didn't work, did it? I know, but there's no. I was looking for the. I was looking for the. You got a few fescue plants. Now some of those could have been fouling, but this is a little bit lighter stock density now, and so you can see there's a lot less plants that are completely impacted, right? And so that's not bad. You know, that's pretty good. Again, this is into the fall. You know, this is mid-September. We're going to get another 30 days worth of regrowth. So that's going to come back pretty nicely. But again, trying to make sure that we're getting everything impacted. And that's pretty close. That's pretty close. So now here's a shot. What stock density do you think this was grazed at? Not near as much, okay? Depends on what you're trying to do. Depends on what you're trying to do, but not near as much. Obviously you got big tall clumps, right? Now we got some regrowth and a lot of clover in between. Okay?
You can see that got grazed to the ground.
Exactly. That's right.
You do that 4 or 5 years, you'll have all.
Exactly. That's exactly right. That's the point is that particularly if we wouldn't have given it this amount of rest that it had to get that clover back in. I mean, that was those areas. And so this actually is a field that it's kind of a go-between field. We've got two or three places rented, and we come across a road and go through another place, and so this paddock comes back. So I have to really work at it to get longer rest on it. They'll come in and hit it. Well, then if I've got really short stuff, I'll let it go. And so this one it was about 20,000 kind of stock density is what it is. And again, you can see the short areas of clover. And clover's not bad, I'm not saying that, but it's just to show the difference in stock density and how uniform they graze. So 20,000, if you had a number of paddocks, what would you have on 20,000 stock density? How many paddocks would that? Some of you grazing experts over here, where would you be at on the number of paddocks? Ballpark. Probably 8 or 10. You know, that if you've got 8 or 10 paddocks, you're probably going to be in stocked fairly close to right. You're going to be in that 15 to 20, 25,000 range. Anything over 25,000, you're probably talking 18 or 20 paddocks, something like that. So most people, and this is one of the things, and and I'll pick on NRCS, Robert, don't listen, but I've worked for them for almost 30 years, so I can pick on them a little bit, right? Because I was one, or I am one. You know, we talk about our basic grazing system is 8 paddocks. I don't even think that's a basic grazing system. You know, I think you ought to be 16 or 20 to be a basic grazing system, okay? Because this is still giving us, particularly in fescue country, this is still giving us problems. Because if we don't, now I can graze at that low of a stock density, and I can let those areas, those grazed areas, come back if I give it a long enough rest period, but and keep some legumes and keep some other things in there. But then I'm actually you know, wasting land, because those areas that didn't get grazed, I didn't get any production off those areas, because now I'm totally focused on those areas that did get grazed. So that's actually a lowering of my. How long am I leaving them? Well, this one was probably it was probably a 3 or 4 day graze, something like that. Yeah. Yep. So this is what it looked like after it's recovered for a few days. This was some areas that I went in. That's a AA battery, okay, to show you how short those areas were grazed at that stocking rate to get that. And this picture is actually 4 or 5 days of regrowth, okay. So if I've got patches now that are half as tall as a AA battery, you know, that's just going to be incredibly short. There's not many of my really high quality species, you know, particularly natives, if I'm trying for that. There's not going to be many of my high quality species that are going to tolerate that. And you can see that. That's mostly clover and probably bluegrass. So dilution is one solution. They've said that for years to fescue, trying to get legumes in there. And so I believe in that. I want some legumes out there, but I don't want it in this manner, okay? I want to, and so do we have to get legumes to grow in a pasture, do we have to have short grubbed off areas, or do we just have to open up the canopy, okay? And so this is a picture. We have an open canopy, but we have no bare ground. You can look, you can see there was this was grazed at, probably 140, 150, something like that, 140 or 150,000 stock density. So we trampled a lot of material down. We opened up that canopy to get excellent legumes in there, but we didn't let individual plants. There's no fescue plants for the most part, excuse me, remaining ungrazed. Okay, so when we want to try to open that up to get clover in there, we need to open it up, but we don't want areas that are nubbed off short with bare ground. Does that make sense? So this is yes. Okay. So we want to open it up to get legumes in there, but just not nub certain areas of it off. Okay. Again, because if we go back to this, eventually those fescue plants are going to continue to take over. So that's my answer to dilution right there. If that's my tool, is trying to do that. One thing not to do, and again, this is a picture from, I'm going back and showing you all my old sins. Okay, This was probably, gosh, it was probably 2001 or 2. I'd just taken over this place, and it had hog manure put on it for 2 or 3 years before that every year, and it was mostly fescue, as you can see. And you know that they would come on and put that hog manure on in August, and that would make the most incredible fall stockpile for wintering cows. And so for 3 or 4 years there, we kind of, I mean, we still grazed it, you know, in the summer a time or two, but then we would get off of it in August. And so what of all the cool season plants, brome, orchard grass, timothy, fescue, of all the cool season grasses, which of those cool season grasses does the biggest percentage of its growth in the fall? Fescue. You know, it, depending on the months, you know, it might have 40% of its annual production in the fall compared to all the others, particularly brome in our part of the world, you know, maybe 10 or 15% in the fall, okay? So by letting it have all fall, and this picture is in December, by letting it have all fall off to rest, which plant was I favoring? Every year, after year, after year. Fescue, okay? So one thing not to do is to say, oh, I've got this favorite field, I want to winter on it every year, I want to stockpile it every year. So don't, I'm not saying to not stockpile, I like stockpile. It's cheap winter feed, it's likely the best use of fescue, but don't use the same field exactly the same every year. Because after about 3 or 4 years of this, you know, there was virtually nothing, no brome left in this field. There was nothing but fescue because I gave it a huge rest period every fall that favored it over all the other species out there. So now we rotate that stockpile around to different fields so that we don't have that, okay? So that's a big thing not to do. And we all do that. Oh, I got a calving pasture. Oh, I've got a wintering pasture. I've got, you know, I'm a huge believer now in more chaos in not ever managing a field the same every year. Okay, sir.
Have you done any work with the new gene test for the cow that'll take fescue?
I was just telling somebody that I was on the list to do that. They have supposedly they have a genetic test that will test for tolerance of fescue. I was on the list to do that with actually Dr. Alan Williams and Craig Roberts this winter, and they sent me the test in a package, and got the cows in, got out there, you know, we were doing some other stuff, opened up the package, and it was the wrong test kits. So, of course, I couldn't do it then, so the cows went out, and I'm a pretty low stress guy. I was not going to get the cows back in to do that test. I do have the right test kits now, and we're going to do that this spring here. So that's one thing not to do. Annuals. You know, I heard several years ago when I started hearing Gabe Brown and all these other guys, oh, you know, annuals, cover crops. Whew. So I said, okay, well, let's give that a whirl. So, and I'd already done a little bit of it before that. So where do annuals fit into a natural ecosystem? Under what event would, if we're talking about prairies, if we're talking about a natural ecosystem, where would annuals fit into that natural ecosystem? After a disturbance, okay? Thank you, Mr. Brand. After a disturbance, whether that's drought, whether that's fire, whether that's overgrazing, you know, and man-made could be chemical or tillage. But you would not have annuals in a system, in a natural ecosystem, without disturbance, would you? So remember that. We're going to get to that more here in a minute. So our disturbance, if we're going to try to put annuals into a perennial system, ate lunch with a couple today, had that same very issue. Oh, we planted cover crops into our perennials and they didn't grow. Well, imagine that. Because and I did it too. Okay, I'm not picking on them. I don't think they're in here, but I'm not picking on them. It's just a disturbance. So what's our disturbance going to be? It's going to probably be one of these three things. So here's a guy from South Missouri that went in, and this was, I think, 11 or 12. They had a drought, and obviously it got grazed pretty hard. He went in and broadcast some brassicas here. Now you can see this. There was a line right here. This was where he had a fence that he grazed off. So he got a little bit of growth right there, but if you look in between it, he also had grass that came back, didn't he? So if you look at, and now this was pretty low cost, this was just a broadcast of these brassicas, but if he wouldn't have broadcast those brassicas, my contention is that he probably would have had as much of his existing perennials come back and provide a very similar volume. Quality is going to be different, okay? I learned this, Mr. Wood, I learned this the hard way probably about 2 or 3. You had, I'd talked to you somewhere, and you had some rye grass, and you were using it, finishing, and you said, oh, you had a few extra bags, and I came over to your house, and I got it. It was a drought year, I don't know, 2 or 3, I can't remember when it was, and I went back, and I drilled this stuff into my perennial pastures, and we got a rain, and they were pretty short at that time. We got a big rain, and all the perennials out. I mean, there was a little rye. The rye, there was any place where there'd been a mineral feeder or a field road or a hay pile or something, the ryegrass came, but everywhere else it was just the perennials that were already there. So that was my first experience trying to seed annuals into an existing perennial pasture. They already have an advantage. They've already got a root system. Even if they're grazed off short, they already have an advantage. So this is one way that you can do it into an overgrazed system. Again, I'm not sure that financially that he got more pasture out of it.
How do you get it to cut the crops in?
We're going to go there. We're going to go there.
I think the same problem.
You can see here, this was really patchy again. You know, so how much more forage did he get from this? Quality's different, I'll give you that. But how much more volume did he get from these brassicas? You know, did the brassicas just choke out the other things? Now the diversity and other stuff, that's a whole other subject. But this is just one example. So a couple years ago, we were still, and I'm going to get into more of this in a minute, but in my part of the world, we decided we wanted to get rid of some fescue. So we started using some chemical. And this is just the results here. This is the difference that you get when you have a disturbance of chemical. You can get an excellent stand. This was just no-till directly into a perennial pasture. It was about an 8 or 10-way mix. I don't recall exactly what it is, but that's in my part of the world. Now, I know Matt Poor and some others down here in the southeast. Your fescue goes more dormant in the summer than mine does. Overgrazed, or not necessarily overgrazed, but fairly short grazed pastures in late May or June, because that's when your fescue starts going dormant. Where I'm at, right on the Missouri-Iowa line, if I have a, you know, not necessarily a hot year, but just kind of a normal year, my fescue is not necessarily going to go dormant enough to allow me to put those annuals into that without some type of suppression, okay? I'll show you some pictures to prove that, and if you feel sorry for me enough on the money I spent to do it, you can reimburse me. Here, this was a guy in Iowa. Again, this is where you have to understand succession. You know, went in and planted an annual. In this case, corn. This was just an experiment for him. Went in and planted some annual into a perennial pasture. You know, did he get his money's worth out of that? Probably not, right? This was another equally stupid individual, me. Okay? You know, hey, Gabriel, plant stuff into your pastures. So I knew that and this actually got sprayed with a rate of gramoxone, a very low rate of gramoxone, to try to suppress it, to stun it, set it, to take it into dormancy a little earlier. And you can see, you think I got and this was as tall as it got. That was why there's so much grass in it, because I tried to let it let it get as much growth as it could. You think I got my money's worth out of that? Probably not. Okay? I mean, I got some diversity. There's some things in there, but you know, again, it goes against the laws of nature. Annuals weren't meant to go into a good, healthy perennial system without some kind of a disturbance. Again, same things, you can see that. So fertility. I'm going fast. Oh, no, I'm not. Fertility. Jim Garrish had always, I'd had many conversations with Jim, and he would always say, oh, you should always be able to get fescue down to 30 or 40%, less than 50% of a mixture in a field. And man, I had daily moves and very intensive rotations and really paid attention, and I still had some fields that were, 70, 80, 90% fescue after 10 years. And then I had fields like this one. This was that field that I showed you with the fescue and the trefoil in it. This was last spring, about, I don't know what that is, 1st of May maybe. Polywire up the right side. They're moving away from the water. And this field now which started out when I took this place over, started out 90% fescue, a little bit of Reed's canary grass and some trefoil. Now is probably, man, I don't know. There's areas of it that's probably almost 100% brome and orchard grass. There's a few areas on the steep hillside that are still 60, 70% fescue, but the vast majority of that field is other species now. Overall, it's probably 30% fescue. This is one of 2 fields that's had probably 6 or 8 applications of hog manure on it, okay? I think, and this is not scientific, I'm still working on some more study of this, including some research, but knowing Jim Garrish, knowing that he was an agronomist first and then a grazer, all of his research at the university was based on fields that were fertilized to soil test. Lime, fertilizer, the whole ball of wax, okay? I was a cheap grazer. I had all these places that I rented. I was really not excited about putting a lot of fertility into them. This place got hog manure because it was free. My own place that I own, I had focused on it, trying to add fertility to it, and it was changing. It was getting more species in there. Fields that hadn't had a lot of fertility, same management, same grazing management, but not a lot of fertility, didn't have that change. I think the endophyte, in the fescue, that fungus in the fescue, gives it the ability to do better in low fertility conditions. And so we're focusing now, I'm not going to go crazy and go buy a bunch of fertilizer, right? But we are going to focus a little bit more on fertility in those fields that we don't necessarily want to convert to something else. And it took this field to really make me understand that that fertility, you can be too cheap. There's times you can be too cheap. You can be too cheap. Does that make sense? I see a few people nodding their head, yeah. Sometimes you can be too cheap. Nope. On the fields that I had better fertility, the same management gave me a lot less fertility, less for fescue.
Was the hog manure surface blind or by chem?
Surface.
Okay.
Yeah. On all the pastures that they don't do any.
Was it what time of year?
They usually do it in the summer. Now I don't. There hadn't been any applied on this for 5 or 6 years now, but it got about 7 or 8 years worth there over probably 8 or 9 years.
Might have been in there was burning grass and that kind of stuff.
I don't think it's just nitrogen. Yep, yep. It's just the overall levels. Most of our phosphorus levels were really, really low. I have focused on the place that I own, putting a lot of phosphorus back on it. Don't tell Ray I put commercial fertilizer on. Where'd he go? But you know, I had places that I took over that, man, they just wouldn't grow anything. I mean, two hills north of this one, a place I rented. I mean, I gave it all year to rest, and it grew foxtail this tall. I mean, it was poor. And so we'd unroll hay on it, and so we started adding some small amounts of commercial fertilizer to jumpstart that system. If I could get hog manure on all of it, I would, but they don't like to do that. So, okay. Renovation, that leads me to my last thing, and I got just enough time to talk about it. So if, you know, I decided that even with the fertility in some areas, if I wanted to do any kind of finishing, any kind of heifer development on a very effective scale, I've got 2 or 3 friends, Dennis McDonald, Alan Powell, both within an hour of us, you know. Man, we all struggled. We all tried to do it on grass, you know, have very adapted cows. You know, Alan and Dennis both, you know, raised their own heifers, raised their own bulls. Dennis has raised his own bulls so his animals are the most adapted, and without supplement, heifer conception, 50%. As yearlings. That's about where I was at. Without supplement, okay? Without supplement. And so, as I said to begin with, you know, cows, I think I can get a pretty acceptable level of production and breeding on cows, on mature cows, but developing heifers, finishing animals, it's just too much of a restriction, okay? And so, I decided on my place that I own, I decided, well, we're going to start working in some other things. We're going to start working in some renovation to it. And so I decided to go with natives, okay? And not just warm seasons, but cool seasons as well. Because of summer slump, our fescue just doesn't do anything in this, in the summer. That chicken was coming back. From a production standpoint, all of our NRCS standards, you know, that we look at, the production that they've done, every single one of them for almost every state shows more total pounds of volume produced with warm seasons than with cool seasons on a per year basis. Why is that? Well, you got 2 growing seasons versus 1 because it's a length of daylight issue, okay? The longest, we're all in the business of capturing sunshine, right? That's what they told us all this morning. But yet, if I've got cool season grasses, what's the longest days of the year are my cool season grasses converting that sunshine into grass? Man, it's hot. I don't want to grow. I don't care what species you're talking about. They're all really slow. And so we just give up too many pounds of forage. Now, do I want pure warm season grass? No. And I think that's where we miss out. The prairies were not pure warm season grass. There was a huge component of cool season, particularly in the Midwest. Huge component. I mean, you know, just go down the list. Virginia wild rye, Canadian wild rye, June grass, river oats. You know, you can go on and on and on. All the broadleaves were cool season. All broadleaf plants are C3s. So there was a huge component of cool seasons. So when people talk about prairie, we have this misconception that it has to be 100% warm season grass, and you can only use it from June 15th to August 15th, and you can't use it any other time, okay? So we got that out of the way. Sorry. I'm a little opinionated once in a while. Fescue, we know it's hard on soil health. Different studies show that the top one, just a thatch of fescue put on a pot of a known quantity of mycorrhizal fungi, reduced mycorrhizal component in that soil. Just pouring water through a thatch of fescue, okay? Alan Franzlubers with ARS down here in your part of the world, has shown that fescue reduces that biologically active component of the soil. This was some stuff I did a couple years, probably 4 or 5 years ago now, with the Haney test and the Solvita test. Field 1 and Field 2. Any guesses? And don't get me wrong, that 30, because this is a really, really well-managed cool season pasture on top, the Field 1 is, and that 30 is really high for the Haney test, but the Field 2 is the 58. Field 2 is Eastern Gama grass, big blue stem, Canadian wild rye, some broadleaves, some clover, a little bit of trefoil, okay? Tremendous, tremendous soil health on very, very diverse fields. C4 plants produce a lot more. We talked about that. So I started down this road with the natives. Anytime we would go in and use stock density on a field, my first goal was to see what would come up, to see what would happen to begin with. And so we had fields that we would use some stock density on, and a year later it would look like this with all the big tall natives in it. Other fields, on the same farm, exact same management, and there'd be nothing. Okay? I have no doubt that historically those fields were managed different. This maybe was the cow lot, the milk cow lot. It didn't ever get tilled. I don't know. Okay? But I kept hearing about this remnant seed, this latent seed bank in the soil. But I had some areas that it never came up. Had a great conversation yesterday with Blaine Hitzfield. He's probably somewhere else because he doesn't like fescue either. But had a great conversation with him. He said that some of these areas where they're sticking their hogs into, these timbered or brushy areas where they're sticking their hogs into, he says they're seeing plants come up. They're seeing more plant diversity than they've ever seen anywhere. I was at Neil Dennis's a couple, 3 or 4 years ago now, and he was saying the same thing. He had these moles and voles that were burrowing up, and he said he always saw new plants around this. So my thinking is we have latent seed bank, but all the seed in that surface that's going to germinate, it germinated, it was overgrazed and killed out. So our latent seed bank is below that germination level unless we do something to bring it up. Now, I'm not really excited about going out and tilling. The hog thing, we may work on that, but 1,000 acres of grass, I'm not going to run hogs on 1,000 acres of grass, right? So my first option for natives is management and let that latent seed bank come back. If it doesn't do that, then I'm going to take the next step and go on into it. 04 was my first experiment with that. I used glyphosate. Don't even get me started on that now. Killed it out. We planted corn and Gama grass. I got some bad seed because I got 0 germination. 3 of us bought seed together and out of the same lot, same place, and we got nothing on any of it. But I had planted it with corn. Corn and Gama you can plant and spray with atrazine. So this was in 04. So I was grazing annuals in 04. Now this was just because I was trying to make some money on something that had failed. But I grazed corn. You can see the ragweed in there. These heifers didn't know how good they had it that year. We strip grazed across this corn, and that was in 04. So that was my first venture into annuals. It was really a rescue. But we get some stuff coming in. You can see here. This is that very diverse field. This is that very first field. Gama grass, big blue stem. Of course, we got some forbs and some other stuff coming in. You can see you can't see a little bit. Down here in the front, the seed heads that you see, that's the Virginia wild rye. On that farm now, without a doubt, the most palatable grass, the thing that they go at the first is the Virginia wild rye. Without a doubt. No questions asked. That's what they go for. They walk into a field of Gama grass and big blue stem and clover, and they eat the Virginia Wild Rye first. Unless it is brown and mature, they go for it first, okay? Oh, this was the picture I thought I had. This is the Virginia Wild Rye. And it's got a pretty good component in there. Can you point that out? All this stuff right here. This is all the Virginia Wild Rye. So, some broadleaves, but it's probably 30% fescue now. Yeah, we're about there. So, this was something else we did. I got lazy. I decided I didn't want to use any Roundup anymore, so I just started no-till drilling directly into it. I figured if my management was good enough to get that latent seed bank to do well, why not just put the seed out there itself, okay? So we did that with no chemical suppression, and it's doing okay, okay? This is whatever, 7 or 8 years later now. It's doing okay. It's tall, but it's not really productive, okay? You can see, I mean, there's some in there, but there's no volume production yet, okay? And we're going to talk about that really quick. Again, this is all planted with a drill, no chemical, no suppression of any kind, just drilling it in there, and then using long rest periods and high stock density. Put some Gama in there. We'll blaze through that. Some more Gama, just different things. Then that's when I listened to this crazy guy. I got invited with Terry Gompert down to 499 Ranch in Tennessee, and Dr. R.P. Cook, you've read Stockman Grass Farmer. He's the one that's using the gramoxone to set it into a suppression so that the annual worm seasons, particularly Johnson grass, comes in. So I did a bunch of that. I tried different rates of that. And that's when I realized that where I'm at in North Missouri, my cool seasons, even with gramoxone, my soils are better, my climate's a little cooler than he is in Tennessee and South Missouri. And 6 and 10 ounces, it just hacks my fescue off. It doesn't suppress it enough to get the annuals, okay? This was the field I showed you earlier. That's what happened here. That was 6 and 10 ounces of gramoxone. Didn't do enough to do anything. So in 2014, I decided to get a little more radical. We went with full rates, Burndown, and then planted into, and that was into fields that had already been planted into Big Blue and Indian to try to get a release. And so we'll see this year what that looks like. Last year I went in, did a complete kill with glyphosate again. That was a long discussion with myself. So half of those fields got planted this past winter to a mix that I told you about earlier. It had about 3 cool season natives and 3 cool season native grasses, 3 warm season native grasses, and about 10 or 12 forbs. And that got planted into it. The other half of those fields that I sprayed out last year and planted a warm season mix in got planted to a cool season cover crop mix. We're going to have a warm season cover crop mix again this year, a second year, and then we're going to go in. The whole point is to try to stimulate all the natives. All the natives are to reach their full potential have to be mycorrhizal, okay? And fescue is essentially anti-mycorrhizal. So the goal with these cover crops, Gabe said this morning, you have to have a reason what you're going to plant them. So my species, my reason was to stimulate mycorrhizal fungi. That was the reason. So conclusions. The problem with fescue is a biological problem. That endophyte in the fescue is biological, isn't it? The solution has got to be biological, I think. Anything else is just treating a symptom. It's not treating the root cause. So what's next? We're going to try a variety of things. We're going to try some fire. We're going to choose some of the biologicals. If I can find a biological that will withstand the fescue. You know, I talked with Abe. Abe's maybe got some ideas on that. So that's what's in the works for this year. Because again, this is a fescue that this is a big blue stem that I planted. That's a native. Same management, same soil type. One of them has a biological advantage, doesn't it? It has mycorrhizal fungi that's native to that plant, to that soil, to that location. This one doesn't. Can I inoculate my plants when I seed them? That'd be a thought, wouldn't it? So, that's where I'm at.